I started off with foundation because foundation is the most important uh, things that you have to look at when you do a buildings. Without proper foundations, actually your building actually is gone already. And there are a lot of cases uh, which the defect is caused by the lack of duty of care by the design professionals when they are designing the foundations of the buildings. Um, why is that? Some is maybe is because pressure from the clients, because for an engineer to design a proper foundations, they will require a proper soil investigations data before they can decide on the suitable of foundations. But often they are pressured by the clients to do as little as possible this soil investigations works. And when they succumb to the pressure of the clients, then that is where the trouble started. So if you design something without a sufficient soil data, then most probably you will get it wrong. Maybe sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you are unlucky. So there are a lot of cases where designer not putting enough uh, care to the design of foundation and cause the buildings to settle. I think even in KK area, we can see a lot of cases of these building settlements happenings. So that is one of the most common, I think, defects from the CNS side. And definitely the designs engineer got to take up the liability if things like that happens. Now, when talking about liability for design professional, um, like I said, there are a few defects. Of course, one is the structural defects. And structural defects often started with foundations. Secondly, is the structure itself. The can be the beam, can be the columns. We have seen a lot of columns and beams crack. Uh, Now, when this happens, then there are two causes. One can be a design defects. Another one can be the defects caused by the constructions. That's mean the contractor, if they did not follow the designs properly. And usually when you have structural defects such as column and beam or slab, it is quite a serious defects and it will take up a lot of cost to repair them. I think the most recent cases of the slab collapse in Sigama area that have caught everybody attention actually. And we actually yesterday have a lengthy discussion with DBKK on the integrity of all buildings in Kota Kinabalu area. Those buildings are above 30 years, above 40 years. And like the Sigama one is constructed during the 70s and completed in 1985. And we know that at that time, the sea sand is widely used for constructions. Now, when sea sand is being used, uh, whose fault is it? Is it the designer fault or the contractor fault? So this will subject to argument, of course. Um, Another defects that I think the designer need to look into is the safety defects. Nowadays, when we design something, we are obliged to look also at the safety defects. That means when we design a building, we have to take into account that what we design include the safety factors inside our designs. Now, for an engineer to design a building, I think the most important thing, of course, they must comply with the code and regulations. We have all sort of codes and regulations for the designs of buildings. And if the engineer do not follow the code and regulations, then he most probably will be found negligence and will be liable for any defects arise from there. Um, with the recent developments of technology, I think with building information modelings, especially being more regularly used for design, that will be an area for dispute in the later on. Because in building information modeling, it will involve the collaboration between architect, engineer, and later on with the maintenance teams. So if there's a digital error in the when they're doing BIM to do the designs and defects occur because of this digital error, who is going to be held responsible for this kind of error? So these are the things that in future I think we have to look at it. And also with AI coming up, AI now is being used to predict the defects of structural risk in real time. And this innovation actually can introduce a new challenges in our assigning liability when error occurs. So the most important thing I think for a professional engineer to avoid being liable for any defects is that he must have show that he have done the duty of care when he is doing the design works. That's one thing. Okay, the most important thing. And second thing is that of course he has fulfilled all the code and requirements for the design. And the thirdly, of course, I think nowadays many young engineers, because there are so many software, design software nowadays, many young engineers basically just input data to get the result out. But for the design software, it is still not enough AI in there, and it is still very much depends on the engineer and the knowledge and experience of the engineer. Because rubbish in, rubbish out. If you put in rubbish in the software, you will come out with a rubbish result also. So that is one of the danger that I think we are facing with the young engineer nowadays. They do not have enough experience and they simply design using the available software without knowing the basic principle that might cause a lot of problems in the future. So I actually done some study on cases that involve this liability in Malaysia. In most of the cases, actually in Malaysia, is quite a lot, and contractor, of course, is the one that always being blamed for defects. But there are also cases there when the professionals are being charged and being in the court when the results rules that the consultant actually is at fault. So I think we really have to look at it as a team for if we want to avoid all these defects in the future, it is actually a teamwork. So not only the contractor, but also the developer, the clients, the engineers involved must work together If not, I think we will not be able to solve these problems forever. So I'll stop my sharing for today with that. Pass it back to Datin.
Okay, thank you very much, Datuk Chin. Okay, our third speaker, before we go to our Q&A session, our third speaker is Mr. Kamraj Nayagam. And being a lawyer, Kamraj would, of course, be familiar with dealing with worst case scenarios where defects occur and no one, accepts liability for it. So what this means is that the party affected would have to bring court action or some form of legal action, right? And this is what Kamraj is going to focus on. He's going to focus on how the courts approach the measure of damages for defects. So where cases are brought for claims for damages for defects, how do the courts approach this question of measure of damages? Okay, over to you, Kamraj.
Thanks, Datin Chu. Okay, as Datin Chu mentioned, my only degree is in English literature. After completing my degree, I switched to do law. So let me call up my slides if I can. And if we go to the first page of actual content. Sorry, we seem to be having some difficulty with this. While we're waiting for it, as Datin has mentioned, I'm going to be dealing with the money aspect. It's all well and good talking about the actual where liability, whose responsibility it is, how the defects come about, but at the end of the day, chances are that it's going to be to do with money. But before we get to the money, let's have a look at a bit of literature. So this is from a fantasy novel, Who's Afraid of Beowulf by Tom Holt. And Tom Holt, as I've worked out from reading his biography online, was actually a solicitor before he gave it up and decided to write fantasy novels for a living, which was probably quite a good move. So he says, so when the castle of Borv, said the king, was built for my father Kettle Trout by Thorkel the builder. My father was a bit of a miser, I'm afraid, and since he was forever going to war with all and sundry, usually very hard up. So when he commissioned the castle from Thorkel, the finest builder of his day, he stipulated that if there was anything wrong with the castle on delivery, Thorkel's life should be forfeit and all his property should pass to the king. Actually, that was standard practice in the building industry then. Hildy, who had had bad experiences with builders in her time, nodded approvingly. So I'm pretty sure that anyone here who's actually had any renovations done on their house knows exactly how they feel, and rather wishes that if there was any defect, you could just chop off the fella's head and take all his money and get somebody else to do it, and then chop off their head, presumably. But that isn't how things work. And so we actually have to look at, in almost all cases where we're not dealing with a catastrophic failure, with a total failure of consideration type situation, we are looking at damages as being the normal remedy for defective works. You're simply, in almost all cases, not going to be able to rescind the contract for defective works, much less chop off the contractor's head. Although ultimately, if it gets serious enough, I suppose you will end up getting enough damages to warrant winding up the contractor, which is, I suppose, the equivalent for a company of having your head chopped off. But anyway, on to the next slide. Let's deal with the actual law. So this is a relatively recent federal court case on the measure of damages. They overturned the Court of Appeals finding, and they held that the sum claimed by the appellants, who were individual unit owners, and their claim was for essentially the damage caused by a failure to meet specifications. Essentially, the type of brick used for the outside wall was not as specified. Now, federal court held that they were entitled to what was specified, and then the question came up as to what was the measure of their damages. The Court of Appeal had held that essentially they were not entitled to the cost of rectification because rectification had not been carried out. Federal court said, look, they have provided an expert, they've provided a quotation which says that this is how much it would cost to remedy. As it says here, in the absence of rebuttal evidence, it does not lie in the mouth of the respondent to say that the sum of 380,500 ringgit claimed by the appellants was excessive and unreasonable, least of all to be wholly disproportionate to the advantages of reinstatement. That was the sum that the appellant's contractor had determined would meet the cost of the remedial works, and that was the only evidence before the court which both the learned SAR and the learned JC had accepted as proof of the losses suffered by the appellants. The principle that the defendant has no burden to offer rebuttal evidence has no application where the plaintiff has produced prima facie proof of loss. So let's dig into that. This is, I would suggest, illustrative of the risks involved in a litigation situation where a party doesn't lead evidence themselves. And so if evidence is not led, then there is a risk that the court will simply accept what the other side leads. And that is something that I think is applies to all litigation, obviously, but more so in the case of defective works, where if one party doesn't, if the party, if the defending party, if you like, let us say, in most cases, the contractor, does not lead his own evidence as to what he says the actual value of the defect is, the actual valuation to be placed on the defect is, then he's at risk that the I'll call the claimant, normally the employer, that the employer's evidence will, or in this case, the end user's evidence will be accepted in toto because there's simply no other alternative to it. So that's a recent federal court decision, and it illustrates to some extent the dangers that can arise. However, I want to focus on what the federal court didn't consider, which is essentially the leading English case on the difference between the cost of rectification and the diminution in values. Next slide, please. This is Ruxley Electronics and Forsyth. Now, Ruxley Electronics and Forsyth has been applied in Malaysia by the High Court, by Justice Pei Swee Chin, who was obviously coming back to deal with a matter which he'd dealt with on the High Court, since he was federal court judge by the time the decision was handed down. But Justice Pei followed the Court of Appeals decision in Ruxley Electronics and Forsyth, 1994, 3 All England 801. Unfortunately, after Justice Pei delivered his decision, the House of Lords unanimously overturned the Court of Appeal in England. Now, as far as I can tell, the House of Lords decision in Ruxley Electronics and Forsyth has never been applied in Malaysia. And I think had the federal court considered it, they might not have found the situation in our first case quite as easy as they did. Now, next slide, please. In Ruxley, the situation was essentially that a swimming pool was constructed at a bungalow for an individual. And the trouble is that the swimming pool was not constructed to specification. So it was specified to be 7 feet 6 inches deep, and instead it was about 6 foot deep. And so the question was it going to be the diminution in value, or was it going to be the cost of reinstatement? Now, the cost of reinstatement was going to be quite difficult to ascertain for the simple reason that it was accepted by the judge in the High Court that it was not going to be possible to actually deepen the swimming pool. In effect, what would have to be done is that the whole thing would have to be dug up and reconstructed rather than simply deepened. So let me just quote the quotation. Let me just read out the quotation from the bottom bit, because I think that sums it up. And this is what the judge in the High Court said. In the course of his written submissions, Mr. Forsyth reminded me that, quote, this is not a matter of commerce to be nicely measured in money. Swimming pools are not necessities. They are for fun. Due to home county's default, I have lost some fun. And the judge basically said, very well, you've lost some fun, and says, I think that where a contract is for the provision of a pleasurable amenity, such as a swimming pool, it is entirely proper to award a general sum for the loss of amenity. I accept that there has been a loss of amenity brought about by the shortfall in depth, and I award damages for that amenity in the sum of £2,500. Now, to put it into context, the claim or the amount that a new pool would have cost was also summed up in a part that I've not quoted. The only way of increasing the depth of the pool was to demolish the existing pool altogether and start again at a cost of £21,560. So the cost of replacing the pool would have been about 8 times as much as what the judge awarded. And this is the same sum, £2,500 for loss of amenity, which the House of Lords reinstated as opposed to the Court of Appeal's decision to allow the cost of reconstruction. So next slide, please. This carries on with the quotations. Let me just summarize it because I'm aware of time running. And essentially, what the House of Lords said is that there must be an element of reasonableness to damages, and that there are times when, if it is unreasonable to reinstate, then the proper measure of damages will be the loss of amenity. And in some cases, it was accepted that this loss of amenity will be essentially nominal. Now, the last bit that it dealt with was intention, and that was something that was dealt with by the federal court in Chong Yi Wei as well, where they said that it doesn't matter what the plaintiff is going to do with the money. As the Court of Appeal put it, quite compellingly in Ruxley Electronics, I think, if somebody steals my watch, I sue in conversion, I get back the value of my watch. I'm not under any obligation to go and buy another watch. The point is that I've lost something, I'm due the value of it. But the normal value will be the value of replacement. And I'm under no, but just because the normal measure is the value of replacement doesn't mean that I am obliged to replace it. Now, although it's to some extent compelling, the House of Lords didn't agree with that, and they did point out that there is a difference between a conversion type case, a theft type of situation, and a breach of contract type situation. And the question is, what is the bargain that you have lost? And so next slide, they dealt with intention. And this is again from the leading judgment of Lord Lloyd. I fully accept that the courts are not normally concerned with what a plaintiff does with his damages, but it does not follow that intention is not relevant to reasonableness, at least in the cases where the plaintiff does not intend to reinstate. Suppose that in the present case, Mr. Forsyth died and the action had been continued by his executors. Is it to be supposed that they would be able to recover the cost of reinstatement, even though they intended to put property on the market without delay? So we can see that intention, at least to the House of Lords, was not a matter of complete irrelevance. And I would suggest that Ruxley, and this is really my closing remark, Ruxley does offer some hint as to the complexities that can arise in relation to the measure of damages for defects. And it's not, I would suggest with utmost respect to the federal court, always as simple as just taking the quote that's offered by the complaining party and accepting it. But of course, if you are the defending party, we go back to what I said at the beginning, it is also incumbent on a defending party in an adversarial system to give the court or the decision maker something to work with. And there is, and I think the main illustration of Chong Yi Wei to me is the risk of simply standing back and saying, prove your case, and not advancing a positive case on your own. So slides off. That's all from me, and back over to you, Datin.
Okay, thank you very much, Kamraj. Okay, we've now come to the question and answer segment of today's talk. Please feel free to post your questions to the chat, right? Maybe to start the ball rolling, perhaps I could ask the speakers one or two questions myself, right? I will start with architect Anthony.
Sure.
Architect Anthony, okay, in many cases, buildings, are constructed, they're handed over, they're occupied, sometimes for many, many years, before the defects actually arise. This will result in a lot of difficulties, right, for the parties to try to determine what is the cause of the defect. Because it's been many, many years, there's a lapse of time, documents are lost or destroyed. people who were in charge of the project, could have left their companies, maybe difficult to trace them, etc. So is it still possible to determine the causes of defects after such a long lapse of time? And perhaps if you could give some examples of perhaps methods or ways that may be taken to determine the causes of defects in such situations.
Well, that's a really long loaded question, but I think it needs to be asked here. I think also to add that to your question is because some of these defects appear much later, laws would have changed. So what would not have been a defect earlier would now become defective. A good one would be the facade cladding, in Malaysia, the Grenfell, we all know about the Grenfell when the facade caught fire, and we all saw the fire in the EPF building along the Federal Highway. So obviously everybody started to equate, what are these combustible panels? So that's quite straightforward because, you can open up the panels, you can send it for testing, you can look at it. So in instances like that, quite straightforward, you can open it up, you see the laws at the time. So in Malaysia, it happened that combustible panels were allowed before 1997. In 1997, after that, buildings above 5 stories, you were not allowed to use it. So if you constructed the building and specified it around 1998, year 2000, and you used those panels, and today those panels are there, you're sitting on a time bomb, and it's a latent issue. So I think in instances like that, quite straightforward. So, but a lot of the cases that we see in Architect Center that I have seen personally are more difficult to identify, primarily from leaks. So buildings, over time they leak and then they crack, and then the repairs are done often just as cosmetically, and they don't deal with the root cause. So that's why I had my slides about root cause analysis and things like that. So in instances where we go in, most of the time there are no drawings. And then when you look at the records, what we often see is parties starts to say, look, okay, the contractor would say, my DLP period is over, don't come back to me, I've done my job. And then the other one, they say, I got a piece of warranty paper here that says the paint is good for 10 years or the waterproofing is for 10 years. So they say, look, oh, that warranty is also expired, so you don't come back to me again. But then there's another factor that I always say is that it's the service life. What would be the service life? I mean, an engineer, we have an engineer here. You cannot be saying that, okay, I warranty the building structure for 10 years, and after 10 years, the building will crack up and you're going to have to start again. But this is a common position that many people are forced to take because, to go in and rectify, talking about the Ruxley case, is often more expensive than actually building it new. And on top of that, you're going to go into occupied buildings, occupied properties. So the cost just, goes haywire. So I think back to your question, how do we analyze this defect? It's a combination of documents that if we have, it's a combination of being able to take building condition inspections, whether visual with our instruments. Records are very important. We often tell the building managers and asset owners to say, look, the moment you have issues, document. And so we run a lot of courses on teaching these people how to do documentation. You don't need to get too technical, but document the four W's. We always say the 4 wives, the 4 wives and the 1 husband, meaning that you got to have the where, the location, the when, the why, and the what, and the H is how much money to fix it, which is the measure of what Kamraj was saying. So I think this basic, simple approach helps a lot. If those documents are already there with the 4 W's, it helps a lot for me over the years if there's documentations. So in this matter, the other aspect of limitations also come in. So we've had cases where problems appear in buildings that are about 10 years old, and we managed to identify the root causes of the problems, and so but earlier on they did a lot of repairs. So in instances like that, it was left to the judge to decide whether it was still within the statutes or limitations or not, or whether there was even the duty of care that exceeded during this time. So one of the cases that we were involved, that I think many of the cases, the cases that went across would be the first one that I think Young Arif Lim Chong Fong was involved with, the matter that I was involved with, Dua Residency. So Dua Residency set the in a way formalized without an appeal regarding the duty of care by the developer to the MC for common property defects. So I was very pleased that finally we had something in writing, because again, the complication in this sense of who can sue if I live in a strata, because I only own my little parcel, and I'm part of a community. And how do people then take an action, file an action against a developer when the MC is, say, not formed, or it's just a joint management body and so forth? But I think that paved the way for many of the subsequent cases that we were involved with. So I think I'll leave it as that.
Okay, thanks, Architect Anthony. Okay, Datuk Chin, can I pose this next question to you? You spoke on different types of design defects, structural defects, non-compliances with codes, etc., right? But in your opinion, why do design professionals make design errors? And what can be done to avoid design errors?
When a designer make an error, there are a few possibilities. Of course, one of the possibilities is that senior designer sometimes leave it to the young engineer to do their own design without proper supervisions. So that is, I think, one of the factor. So as a senior engineer, I think it is our duty to not let 100% goes with the young engineer. You really have to check their work and make sure that before you sign the drawings, they have done a proper design. So this is one of the major factor, I think, causing a lot of design failure nowadays. So if the boss is too busy with getting business and other things, and overlook the design of this stuff, I think at the end of the day, the boss have to take the liability as well. So these are important things, I think.
Okay, thanks, Datuk Chin. Actually, it's very interesting, your comment, because I advise the board of engineers, and we have come across cases involving complaints made against engineers, something that they did wrong in the design. And one of the cases I came across, which to my mind, was a design by the engineer for an industrial building, some kind of a factory. I think it was quite a big factory. So, of course, the focus was on the factory itself. But one of the parts of the factory was a pedestrian bridge, right? Just a small component, I think the engineer felt. So he left it to his junior, like you said, a graduate engineer to do it. And I think it came about, during the hearing of the complaint against the engineer, that he didn't check his graduate engineer's work. And in that case, it was really unfortunate. The bridge collapsed, and if I am not mistaken, there was someone who died. So it can become a very, very serious matter, right? Even though it is a small part of the engineering design. So I think what you brought up is very important. Okay, maybe the last question I have is for Kamraj. Kamraj, you represent parties in legal actions to claim damages for building defects. What are some of the practical difficulties that are commonly faced by parties in legal actions for building defects in relation to cost of defects? So how do you prove the cost of defects? What are some of the practical difficulties? And as well as in relation to the measure of damages, right? Perhaps you could share some of these difficulties and perhaps what could be done to try to overcome this.
Okay. Well, I think I'll go back to what Architect Anthony said. It's about the documentation. It's really about the quality of the evidence that you're going to be able to lead. And whilst there's no magic bullet, as we know, after all these years, what I can say is that as the lawyer presenting the case, as the lawyer who's going to present the case in court, and as the lawyer who's going to hopefully be drafting the case, it's important to get in touch with your likely witnesses and with the people instructing you as soon as possible. So rather than simply, if you simply accept what the client tells you is the sum due for the defect due, you're verging very close on what Justice Edgar Joseph in Popular Garments, quoting, I think, Bonham Carter and Grosvenor Park Hotel, said is effectively writing down a list of issues, adding a number to it, and throwing it at the head of the court. And you know that there is ample case authority, and the simple answer is that that's not going to work. So you're going to have to do it at some point. At some point, you're going to have to organize the information and actually prove what you've proved, not only that it is a defect, but that the cost of either rectifying this defect or the diminution in value caused by this defect is this much. And the sooner you get to it, the better, because otherwise it's very, very tempting for a court to simply say, okay, this is not, simply doesn't meet the threshold of proof, simply doesn't come up with proof, and therefore it's going to be dismissed. So I would say that the devil is always in the details, and it's important to get on top of those details and get on top of the evidence as early as possible.
Okay, we would like to hear, actually, we would like to have some questions from the participants. Please do, type your questions and pose it to the speakers.
So no questions yet. I think maybe we can have a yarn.
Okay, the speakers are so clear. Nobody has any questions.
It's a
Yes, by the looks of things, everything was explained so clearly that nobody has any questions right now. But if they do happen to reach out to me, I will make sure to pass along the questions that they may have. So, Datin Chu, do you have anything else you'd like to continue? Any more questions you have?
Well, I actually have a lot of questions, but I think I would not want to take everyone's time. Yeah.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, as we wrap up today's insightful discussion, I'd like to extend a sincere appreciation to Datin Chu and our panelists for sharing your expertise on liability for design and construction defects. Your insights have been undoubtedly very valuable takeaways for all of us. A big thank you as well to our participants for your active engagement. I wish we had a couple more questions or time for that. We hope it has been very informative and beneficial to all. Before we conclude, I'd like to take this opportunity to invite you to our next BicTok session, which promises to be another engaging discussion. Our upcoming session is titled The Essentials of Advocacy in Arbitration, which will take place on the 9th of April. You can see in the chat box, there's the registration link as well as some information. We'll be having Mr. Prakashan as our moderator and an esteemed panel featuring Mr. Fu Jun Liang, Mr. Shannon Raj, as well as Mr. Sanjay Mohan. So whether you're in the legal profession, a legal professional, an industry stakeholder, or simply interested in the art of advocacy in arbitration, this is a session you wouldn't want to miss. So thank you so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at our next BicTok session. Have a great evening. Thank you so much again.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.